Before we begin, take a moment to listen. Not to my voice, but to the world itself. Every coastline, every tide, every breath of ocean water carries a rhythm older than any civilization. Long before humans learned to count time, nature was already keeping it. Here on NatureABC, we don't rush through those rhythms. We slow down and listen to them, because some of the most important stories on Earth are happening quietly, beneath the surface. Today's story begins in the ocean. Not with whales or storms or shipwrecks, but with something far smaller, something invisible, a pulse that keeps coral reefs alive, and in ways we're only beginning to understand, helps keep us alive too. To hear it, we have to look closer than ever before. This is the story of the reef's invisible engine, and why its rhythm may decide the future of food, health, and life along our coasts. Part 1. The Rhythm of the Gulf, the Timekeepers. The story of the human race has always been tethered to the rhythm of the tides, but until very recently, we had no idea that the tides were only the beginning of the ocean's complexity. If you were to stand on the shores of the Gulf of Aqaba and the northern reaches of the Red Sea, you would see a landscape of stark contrasts. On one side, the parched, red mountains of the desert. On the other, a deep cobalt blue that hides one of the most sophisticated biological engines on Earth. In the year 2024, a team of researchers led by Dr. Herdy Steinstatier and Dr. Miguel Frada arrived here with a question that seemed simple, but was fundamentally revolutionary. Does the coral reef have a schedule? We have long known that the ocean changes with the seasons. The winter brings colder currents, the summer brings the bloom of plankton. But Dr. Steinstatier suspected that the reef operated on a much tighter clock. She suspected that the reef was not just a passive structure, but a conductor, orchestrating the lives of the trillions of microscopic organisms that surround it every single hour of the day. To prove this, the team did something grueling. In an age of satellite imagery and remote sensing, they went back to the basics of time series science. For weeks, they sampled the water above the reef every 6 hours. Day and night, through the exhaustion of the midnight shift and the blistering heat of the midday sun, they pulled vials of water from the sea. They weren't just looking for fish, they were looking for the invisible. They used genetic sequencing and advanced imaging, tools that allow us to read the DNA of the water itself, to see which microbes were present at 6 a.m. versus 6 p.m. What they discovered was a biological masterpiece. They found that the coral reef acts as a strong regulator of the surrounding ocean's microscopic life. It doesn't just sit in the water, it cleans it, feeds it, and reshapes it. In the open ocean, a few miles away, the microbial communities were relatively stable, but directly above the reef, the water was pulsing. Imagine the reef at midnight. While the world above is dark, the reef becomes a site of intense predation. The researchers found that populations of heterotrophic protists, the microscopic lions of the sea, rose by a staggering 80% at night. These tiny hunters are the reef's cleaning crew. They roam the water column, feasting on bacteria, keeping the microbial populations in check. This is a vital service. Without these predators, the bacteria would bloom out of control, clouding the water and stealing the oxygen. Then, as the first light of dawn touches the Red Sea, the rhythm shifts. The predators retreat and the producers take over. The team noticed a peculiar peak in the genetic signal of symbiotic around midday. These are the famous zooxanthellae, the tiny algae that live inside the coral's skin and provide them with energy through photosynthesis. The fact that their signal peaked in the open water at noon suggests a massive, coordinated breath from the reef, a release of organic material and energy that follows the sun's path across the sky. This was the first major realization of our story. The reef is a timekeeper. Its daily rhythms are often stronger than the changes brought by the four seasons. It is an active ecosystem engineer, reshaping the ocean hour by hour. But this invisible engine is fragile, and to understand what happens when it breaks, We must travel from the pristine waters of the Red Sea to the pressured coastlines of the Indo-Pacific. Part 2. The ghost in the water that collapse. If the Red Sea represents the pulse of a healthy reef, many other parts of the world are currently witnessing that pulse start to skip. To understand the stakes, we have to look at a phenomenon that marine biologists call microbialization. It is a cold, scientific term for a heartbreaking process. For millions of years, the relationship between fish, coral, and microbes was a closed loop. The coral provided the structure, the fish provided the protection by eating the algae, and the microbes processed the waste. But as the human population grew to 8.3 billion, we began to pull the brass and percussion out of this orchestra. We overfished. We took the parrotfish, the snappers, and the groupers, and when the fish vanished, the loop broke. Without herbivorous fish to graze on the reef, algae began to grow unchecked. Algae is the natural rival of coral, but algae doesn't just grow over the coral, it fights dirty. Research shows that these algae release massive amounts of dissolved organic carbon. In a healthy reef, dock is a precious resource, carefully recycled. But in an overfished reef, the algae flood the water with it. This excess carbon acts like junk food for the microbial world. The healthy, rhythmic cycle discovered by Dr. Steinstatier, the 80% rise in predators, the midday peak of symbionts, is replaced by a chaotic explosion of opportunistic bacteria. These bad microbes thrive on the sugary waste of the algae. They multiply at rates the reef's natural predators can no longer control. The water becomes microbialized. It grows thick with pathogens that stress the coral, making it more susceptible to disease and heat. In the markets of North Sulawesi, Indonesia, this isn't a theory, it's a daily reality. Fishers who once brought in boatloads of large, colorful reef fish now find their nets filled with trash fish, or worse, nothing at all. They look out at reefs that have turned into algal barrens, gray, slimy landscapes where the invisible engine has stalled. The tragedy of microbialization is that it hides the damage. To a casual observer, the water might still look blue, but the DNA tells a different story. The pulse is gone. The reef is no longer an engineer of life. It has become a factory for decay. And this decay has a direct, measurable impact on the dinner plates of millions of people. Part 3. The nutrient gap, the global kitchen. This brings us to the second pillar of our story, the human cost of a broken reef. While Dr. Steinstatier was sampling the Red Sea, another team, led by Dr. Jessica Zamborain-Mason at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, was looking at the global map of hunger. We are currently facing a global nutritional crisis. It isn't just that people don't have enough calories, it's that they don't have the right calories. Scientists call this hidden hunger. You can have a full stomach of rice or corn, but if you lack iron, zinc, vitamin A, and omega-3 fatty acids, your body begins to fail. In children, this leads to stunting, a permanent physical and cognitive limitation. For decades, the solution to global hunger was seen as a land-based problem. We looked to wheat, soy, and cattle. But Zamborain-Mason's team realized that the answer was actually swimming right off our coasts. Reef fish are not just a source of protein, they are nature's multivitamins. Take, for example, the small fish often caught on reefs. When eaten whole, they provide a source of bioavailable calcium from their bones that is as effective as milk. Their eyes and viscera are rich in vitamin A. Their flesh is packed with iron and zinc. For a child in a coastal village in Madagascar or the Philippines, a single serving of reef fish can be the difference between a healthy life and a life of chronic illness. The Smithsonian study asked a bold question. What if we stopped treating reefs as museums to be protected and started treating them as farms to be managed? They analyzed data from over 2,000 reef sites across the globe, including the Dominican Republic, Panama, Kenya, and Indonesia. They calculated the maximum sustainable yield, the mathematical point where you can take the most fish possible without damaging the population's ability to regrow. The results were staggering. They found that if we allowed overfished reefs to recover, the global supply of sustainable seafood would jump by nearly 50%. In some countries, this would provide up to 162 million additional servings of fish per year. The team then did something even more revealing. They overlaid the map of potential fish gains with the Global Hunger Index. The correlation was almost perfect. The countries that are the most fish-stressed, where the reefs are the most depleted, are the exact same countries where the human population is suffering the most from micronutrient deficiencies. This is the central irony of our story. The people who need the reef the most are the ones whose reefs are the most broken. But it is also a story of immense hope, because it means that the solution to global hunger doesn't require a new invention or a high-tech lab. It requires us to restore the invisible engine we discovered in Part 1. If we can bring back the microbial pulse, the fish will follow. And if the fish follow, the hunger will recede. Part 4. The strategy of pretty good. How do we actually fix this? We know that the recovery of a reef can take anywhere from 6 to 50 years. For a fisher in a developing nation, 50 years is an eternity. They cannot wait half a century for their children to eat. This is where the science of pretty good yield comes in. In the past, conservation was often all or nothing. We either fished a reef until it collapsed, or we turned it into a no-take zone where no one could fish at all. But the Smithsonian research suggests a third way. Pretty good yield is a management strategy that aims for about 80% of the maximum possible fish without requiring the extreme restrictions of a total ban. By aiming for pretty good, we allow the reef's biomass to build back up to a point where the invisible engine can function again. We see this in action in South Sulawesi, Indonesia. Here, a project known as Reef Stars is showing that you don't always need 50 years. By placing hexagonal steel structures on the seabed, they provide a stable home for coral fragments. In just 4 years, these stars have turned rubble deserts back into vibrant, pulsing reefs. As the coral grows back on these stars, the microbial rhythm returns. The predators come back at night. The symbiotic pulse at noon. And as the engine restarts, the fish return, not in 50 years but in 5. This is the blueprint for the future. Part 5. The Indonesian epicenter, the potential of the many. As we move from the microscopic pulse of the Red Sea to the vast archipelagos of the Indo-Pacific, the scale of our story expands. We arrive in Indonesia, a nation of over 17,000 islands and home to the most diverse coral reefs on the planet. But it is also a nation where the invisible engine and the global kitchen are locked in a tense, daily struggle. In the year 2025, Indonesia's Global Hunger Index score sat at 16.9, a level classified as moderate, but one that hides deep regional disparities. In provinces like Papua and West Nusa Tenggara, the reality is far more serious. Here, child stunting, a result of chronic malnutrition, remains a persistent ghost. When a child is stunted, they are not just shorter. Their brain development is restricted, and their future earning potential is capped before they ever reach adulthood. This is where the research from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, STRI, becomes a beacon of hope. Their global analysis identified Indonesia as having the single greatest potential for gain. If the overfished reefs of Indonesia were managed to reach their maximum sustainable yield, the country could produce an additional 162 million sustainable fish servings every year. To put that in perspective, that is enough to meet the yearly seafood requirements for an additional 5.5 million people. But to reach those numbers, we must look at the specific fish being caught. While wealthy markets often prize large pelagic fish like tuna, for the coastal poor of Indonesia, the most important fish are the nature's multivitamins found right on the reef: small groupers, snappers, and rabbitfish. These fish are eaten whole or in soups, providing a concentrated source of heme iron, a form of iron that is much easier for the human body to absorb than iron from plants. For a pregnant woman in a remote village, A single serving of reef-caught fish can provide 38% of her daily iron needs. In the waters of North Sulawesi, we see the battle for these nutrients playing out. Small-scale fishers head out in prows, traditional outrigger canoes, at dawn. They are looking for the very fish that Article 2 identifies as being underproduced. They are fishing on reefs that have been microbialized, where the water is cloudy and the corals are struggling. These fishers are caught in a poverty trap. They must fish to survive today, but by fishing the juveniles and the spawners, they ensure there will be fewer fish tomorrow. However, a new movement is growing. In villages like those in the Banggai Islands, local leaders are reviving sasi, a traditional system of closing off reefs to allow them to rest. This isn't just a cultural ritual, it is a biological reset button. By closing a reef for 2 years, the community allows the invisible engine to restart. The algae are cleared by returning parrotfish. The microbial pulse returns to its healthy 24-hour cycle, and the fish biomass begins to double. The Smithsonian researchers found that to reach maximum production, many reefs need to double their standing biomass. Literally, the total weight of fish in the water, by a median of 32 tons per square kilometer. In Indonesia, SASI is proving that when the community owns the recovery, the engine can be jump-started. Part 6. The economics of the waiting game, the 50-year horizon. The hardest part of the story is the math of time. The Smithsonian study, led by Dr. Jessica Zamborain Mason, did not shy away from the difficult truth. Recovery is not a fast process. Depending on how badly a reef has been degraded, the road back to health can take anywhere from 6 to 50 years. This recovery window is the most dangerous period for any coastal nation. If a country like Kenya or Tanzania decided today to strictly manage its reefs to reach pretty good yields, they would see a massive long-term benefit, up to a 4-fold increase in the number of people meeting their nutritional needs. But in the short term, the nets would be lighter. Why does it take 50 years for some reefs and only 6 for others? The answer brings us back to the microbial discovery in the Red Sea. A reef is like a house. If the foundation, the microbial health and the structural complexity of the coral is still intact, you can move back in quickly. The researchers in the Red Sea found that a healthy reef is a strong regulator, actively scrubbing the water of harmful bacteria. If that scrubbing service is still working, fish populations can bounce back in less than a decade. But if the foundation is gone, if the reef has been blasted by dynamite fishing or smothered by pollution, the invisible engine has no place to run. The water becomes dominated by opportunistic pathogens, and the fish larvae that drift in from the open ocean find nowhere to settle. In these algal barrens, the recovery clock stretches toward the 50-year mark. This is the waiting game. To win it, the research suggests we cannot rely on conservation alone. We need an ecosystem-based solution. This means providing alternative food sources, such as small-scale aquaculture of seaweeds or tilapia, while the reefs are resting. It means international cooperation where wealthier nations support the food security of developing ones during the recovery period. As Dr. Sean Connolly of STRI points out, the correlation between reef recovery and the Global Hunger Index is so strong that we must view reef management as a global public health priority, not just an environmental one. Part 7. The Climate Refuge, a Pulse for the Future. As we look toward the year 2026 and beyond, a new shadow hangs over our story, the warming of the oceans. We have established that the reef is a pantry for the world, but what happens when the pantry begins to burn? This is where the Red Sea research from Article 1 offers a surprising glimmer of hope. The Gulf of Aqaba is a unique environment. Because of its geological history, the corals here have evolved to be incredibly heat-tolerant. They are a climate refuge. While reefs in the Great Barrier Reef or the Caribbean are bleaching at record rates, the corals in the northern Red Sea are holding steady. More importantly, their microbial heartbeat is still strong. The 24-hour cycle of predators and producers continues even in the hottest summers. This suggests that the invisible engine is more resilient than we thought, provided the water remains clean and the fish are protected. These strong reefs serve as a biological blueprint for the rest of the world. By studying how the Red Sea reef maintains its microbial rhythm under stress, scientists are learning how to vaccinate other reefs. We are beginning to see a future where microbial bioindicators, the sensors mentioned by Dr. Steinstetier, become as common as weather stations. These sensors will sit on reefs across Indonesia, Kenya, and Panama, measuring the daily pulse of the water. If the nighttime rise of predators begins to drop, or if the midday peak of symbionts fades, the system will trigger an early warning. It will tell local fishers, the engine is stalling. We need to rest the reef now, before the fish disappear. This is the merger of the two articles, using the high-tech microbial science of the Red Sea to secure the low-tech food supply of a fishing village. It is a world where we manage the small to protect the large. Part 8, the final synthesis, the circle of life. We have traveled from the microscopic labs of Jerusalem and Haifa to the Smithsonian's data centers in Panama, and finally to the bustling fish markets of Southeast Asia. We have seen how a single drop of water contains a 24-hour clock that dictates the survival of an ecosystem. We have seen how a 50% boost in fish supply could save millions of lives. But the most important lesson of this story is that the pulse and the pantry are not two different things. They are the same system, viewed through different lenses. When Dr. Steinstetier looks through her microscope and sees the heterotrophic protists rising at night, she is looking at the beginning of a meal. Those protists will be eaten by zooplankton, which will be eaten by small reef fish, which will be eaten by a grouper, which will eventually provide the iron and zinc needed by a child in a coastal village. If the pulse is weak at the start, the child will be weak at the end. This story about our reefs is a story of choice. We are at a crossroads. We can continue to allow the invisible engine to stall, watching as our reefs turn into gray, microbialized barrens that can no longer feed us. Or we can choose to listen to the rhythm. We can choose to manage our reefs for pretty good yields, allowing the biomass to double and the heartbeat to return. The Smithsonian study tells us that the benefits are measurable. They are measured in the 162 million servings of fish. They are measured in the 5.5 million people who will no longer be hungry. They are measured in the 50-year horizon of a planet that has finally learned to live within its limits. As the sun sets over the Gulf of Aqaba, the heterotrophic protists are beginning their nightly rise. In Indonesia, a fisher is bringing his canoe home, hoping for a better catch tomorrow. The invisible engine is still ticking. The pantry is still there. We have the science, we have the data, and for the first time we have the full story. The pulse of the reef is the pulse of our own future, and it is up to us to make sure it keeps beating.